Today, we're going to continue our conversation on positive psychology, talking specifically about culture and how it influences us. So, when we think about culture and we think about positive psychology, our culture influences us. And then how we perceive the world through our cultural lens influences the values we place on things and our determination of the good life. So, how exactly does culture affect us? So, as we talked about in the first lecture or second lecture, we talked about this need to fit in. Everyone has a certain need to fit in, and we want to fit in with other people. And so, what other people are doing is what we're going to end up doing. So, we can think about this individually. Each person individually has a different need to fit in, but culturally, our culture can promote a higher need to fit in with others, or sort of a bigger cultural threshold or force pushing us to fit in with others. And so we can see this play out in the laws that each country and society makes, what we determine is right and wrong with taboos. We can also think about societal norms. How do we interact with people? What is normal to do? What is not normal to do? These can all influence us. And then we think about how culture can affect us and how it affects what we see as good things, what our virtues are. And so, looking a little more closely, I want to talk about how culture then determines what we think about. So, we can think about morality, virtues versus vices, good versus bad. Each culture is going to have slightly different variations on these. And so, how does culture influence our morality? We can also think about construct. One construct may not be the same for a different culture. And we can think about construct equivalence, which you talked about in the last lecture. Then we can think about outcomes. How does culture actually shift outcomes? And we're going to talk a little bit about performance and coping strategies. So, first, I'd like to talk a little bit about morality. So, we can see this all around us. We each have a different uniqueness. We each want to be unique, but we also want to fit in. And so, our cultural difference can be how much we want to fit in with the society. We talked about Eastern cultures, and they have a more of a drive to fit in with each other. So we can think about that as a moral characteristic, falling in line with others. We can think about self efficacy and how much we set our lives to do out what we want to do, or we allow life to happen to us. We can think about Taoism, which we talked about before, which has a strong emphasis on living in accordance with nature, not so much as trying to build your own path. And then we can think about Western culture, where it's you are the you are the reason your life happens. You choose how your life wants to be. There's a huge self efficacy in Western culture, and other cultures may not have that. We can think about social bonds. How much does our social bonds mean to us? We can think about in Western culture this idea of the lone wolf, or I just gotta grind and do everything myself. I gotta transcend these needing other people and figure out everything for myself. That's something as a culture that some aspects of our society have promoted. But we can also think about the more collectivist culture and Eastern traditions, where it's very much your life is looked at as a union of multiple people, not just yourself. You can think about confrontation. How much are you willing to go and voice your opinion on someone else? How much are you willing to go start up confrontation? We can think about the Eastern tradition and the Eastern cultures with the big focus on fitting in, and we can think maybe they're not going to be as prone to start conflict with others. Whereas in Western culture, that's a big part of who we are, speaking our voice, etc. We can think even about materialism. How much emphasis do we put on having things? A big drive in Western culture is consumerism and having the latest and greatest. That may not be the case for everywhere else. So, how does culture influence our morals and what we decide is good and bad? These are just a few ideas that I came up with, but you can think about this in so many aspects. Everything you do virtually is going to have some sort of cultural influence. Now we can think about constructs. So, how do different cultures view the same thing or seemingly the same thing in very different ways? So, we talked a lot about wisdom and how some cultures promote an intelligence version of wisdom, where intelligence means I have a lot of experience in life. I know a lot of things. Whereas other cultures view wisdom more as an emotional intelligence. I have the ability to form relationships with people. To uh, have I have the ability to regulate my own emotions, And you can think about the intellectual side versus the emotional intelligence side of wisdom. And then I want to go into a case study about how Hmong people repair relationships. So, in Western culture, repairing a relationship could be easy as saying, like, hey, I'm sorry. But in the Hmong tradition, there's a very strong focus on you have to repair the respect between the two people and between each other. You have to show the other person you respect them. And a lot of times you have to get a third party involved to repair this relationship. And there's a very strong spiritual component of rebuilding relationships. And we just don't see that in Western culture as much. So this is a very big difference in our construct of what repairing a relationship means. We can also think about courage, whereas it may be courageous for Western society to, speak up your mind, say what you want, and sort of promote conflict, not aggressive conflict, but just voicing your opinion. Whereas it may be courageous in other cultures to sort of like keep your mouth shut, and fall in line with other people. That may be as seen as bravery. So these are some of how the ways that we have different constructs. Then we could think about happiness. What does happiness mean? In Western culture, as we talked about with materialism, there's a strong emphasis on getting things, and that's what's going to make us happy. Whereas we think of the Eastern tradition and we look at Taoism again, it's living life. It's living in accordance with life. Or if you think about Buddhism, it's about reducing the amount of suffering you have and transcending suffering. So these are some of the ways that happiness is also a construct and how those constructs differ in different cultures. And so now I want to talk a little bit about outcomes. And so there was this amazing study in which they looked at optimism and pessimism in Caucasians and Asians. And so they found that Caucasians are, in general, more optimistic than Asians, who are more pessimistic. But here's the crazy thing, is that optimism in Asians actually led to lower performance in school tasks. And that's crazy. How would that happen? So let's keep going. So we also saw that problem solving in Asians, a higher level of problem solving led to less depression in Asians. But this was not the same in Caucasians. And we see that negativity, actually, in Asian culture, negativity promoted better school performance, better academic performance. And so that's crazy how this, the cultural differences has such strong outcomes for things that, at least for me before I read the study, I really thought that, being optimistic would improve all these things. But actually, we learned that problem solving and all these aspects are completely different in separate cultures. And then if we look at African Americans or African culture, we see that if people have a strong sense of their traditional values, they actually have more psychological well-being and perform better in physical aspects of health. So how is that possible? This is not only, but this is shown to be an effective way for African Americans and African cultures to actually have more positive well-being. But this is very different from Caucasians, what we normally think of. And so then we'll look at some coping strategies. And so they saw that there's 4 universal coping strategies that were very effective. If a parent gets Alzheimer's, these were shown to be not a parent. If a loved one gets Alzheimer's, these were shown to be very effective ways to deal with that. You have action, doing something. You have denial of the situation, sort of like deluding yourself into thinking, oh, everything's okay. So you have seeking social support, and you have reappraisal of the situation. So sort of interpreting it as actually being different. So thinking about the situation and interpreting it. But they realized that these 4 coping strategies had different effects on different cultures of people. So it's not the same. And so these are some of the ways that culture has seemingly far-reaching influences on even things like coping strategies, or even things like optimism and problem solving, and how that affects your educational outcomes. So now I want to think about, what does a good life mean? So, a lot of the good life can be defined culturally and also defined on an individual level. But a lot of people refer to religion to give them a guide for the good life. So this could be going to heaven for Christianity, or it could be um, ending the cycle of reincarnation in Hinduism, or going with the flow in Taoism. But we also see some other ways that people live the good life, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Some people fall into hedonism, where all they want to do is fulfill their worldly desires, and they feel like that's going to make them happy. So we can think about this in a materialistic sense. We also have some people develop a strong duty. They feel like their goal in life is to do something, and they have a duty to do that. Or we can think about some people who are very future oriented, and they think, my life, what is the good life? My purpose, the mission in my life is to go and make sure future generations are better off. Or we can think about people who are family oriented or community oriented, where their version of the good life is, protecting their family, supporting their family, and doing all those things. So, how does culture influence what we think of as a good life? And here I have a good example. This is called the parable of the wise man of the Gulf. And so it goes like this. So there's a fisherman from Mexico who's just, he's off, he's fishing, he has a net, and he's getting a lot of shrimp. And so an American sees him and he says, "Whoa, your net could be optimized so much better. It has so many holes in it. If you close up these nets, you would get more fish." And he says, "Okay, well, why would I want to do that?" And then he says, "Well, if you get more shrimp, you could go make more money." And then he says, "You have all this time. Like, what are you doing with all your time?" And the fisherman says, "Well, I go collect my fish for however many hours, and I go hang out with my family, and I go pray." And he said, "Okay, well, you have all this time that you're not catching fish. If you optimize the way you catch fish, you could make a lot of money. You could go set up you could go build a company and make even more fish." And he said, "Okay, well, what will happen when I do that?" "Well, if you work really hard for 40 or 50 years, you'll make it big, and you'll be able to sell this company of getting all these fish and shrimp for billions of dollars." And he said, "And then what am I going to do?" He said, "And then you'll finally be able to live the life you want and go fishing in your free time, hang out with your family, and go pray." And the fisherman, he thinks, "That's what I'm doing right now. Why do I need to do all these extra steps to make all this extra money? For what? What's the purpose?" And so I want to end this off with looking at some personal reflections. So I want us all to think about what does a good life mean for me? And really contemplate this and maybe write it out. And, I would love for you guys to share in the comments, what does good life mean for you? What are your values? What are your morals? And then I'd like you to think about, why are these your morals and values? How does culture influence your good life, your values, and your morals? I'd love for everyone to sort of reflect on this and send in the comments the answers to these questions. And with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.